Madam President, like my colleague from Indiana, Senator Donnelly, I also want to take a moment before I deliver my remarks here to thank the Capitol Police and all of our law enforcement and first responders that put themselves in the line, on the line to protect others. I know I speak for every Republican and every Democrat and all of our staffs that we deeply appreciate their work and their sacrifice. These brave men and women here every day, whether they're paid or not, and we appreciate that. There's one thing that we're united here, and I wish there were more. It's our respect for those who serve to protect, those serving us here at home as well as those serving us in harm's way abroad. We owe them our support, and we owe them our thanks. Madam President, I'm hearing from a number of Hoosiers, as my colleague has from Indiana. They're tired of political gamesmanship. They're tired of paying taxes to a government that isn't listening or delivering for them. And now we're in a situation where they're tired of our careening toward these cliffs and shutdowns. But when the Republican-controlled House sent over legislation to the Senate, calling for House and Senate leaders to conference together, to sit down in a room, to talk through this problem and come to a solution, this good faith effort was rejected out of hand by the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Reid from Nevada. We were willing to sit down and debate this issue. Once again, yet another good faith effort sent over by Republicans to help fund essential functions of this government, dead on arrival in the United States Senate. The Senate Majority Leader parroting the words of the President: "We will not negotiate." Refusing to allow Republicans and Democrats to try to find a way forward to resolve this issue and get our government up and functioning. Now, in the past, when these things happened, presidents, realizing that they were elected to lead, we're elected to serve here, we're elected to serve the president, we're elected to serve the people that we represent, but the president is elected to serve this country. And when the president, in the past, has come up in a stalemate situation, there's been a reach out to the other side, and whenever you have a divided government. Now, of course, after 2008, the Democrats won control of the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. They had total control, and they pushed through a number of measures without any single Republican or opposition support. Those programs now we're dealing with, Obamacare being the primary one that has brought us to this particular point. The lesson learned here: when one party has total control without support from the opposition party, you end up with a legislation that is dysfunctional, that doesn't work, that reflects the ideology of one party. It doesn't have any balance to it. We're now at a position where we have a divided government, and what we would like is to have some say on how this goes forward, to point out those things of this bill that are not working, to point out the disaster that this is turning out to be, the dysfunction of this particular legislation. But the point I'm trying to make here is that whatever the issue, whenever we come to a stalemate, historically, throughout the history of this country, it is the commander-in-chief, it is the president who has stepped forward and taken the initiative and said, we need to work together to solve this. We can't impose our will on the body that is the American people has divided, giving control of one house to one party and control of the other house to another party. And so Ronald Reagan reached out to Tip O'Neill, and some very significant measures, stalemates, were resolved because the president reached out and was willing to negotiate. Democrat President Bill Clinton reached out to a then Republican Speaker of the House in the 90s, and we addressed a major, major issue with welfare reform, a much-needed welfare reform. It couldn't have happened without the president reaching out. And so here and I could give other examples, but here we are, another stalemate situation. And yet, what do we hear? No matter what Republicans send over, no matter what the offer is, if the offer is to let's sit down and conference this, the reaction from the Senate Majority Leader is we refuse to negotiate. The reaction from the White House and this president over and over and over and over again is I will not negotiate. Even though the American public sent you control of one house of Congress, even though the Constitution establishes the roles of the Congress vis-a-vis the president and calls for an agreement between the two before we can move forward, this president, for whatever motive, says, I will not negotiate. We can do something right now to help Americans. We can come together and fund important programs and departments that should not have been jeopardized because of this impasse. We can at least do that. If we can't get the president to negotiate, can we not at least take some steps forward for those essential functions of government? Now, Republicans have sent over 9 such propositions and proposals. Each one of them has been rejected dead on arrival, not even allowed to debate, procedurally stopped by the Majority Leader. But let me suggest 4 that are waiting in the wings. And surely, for reasons of health and safety of Americans, surely we can agree to support these 4, and perhaps more. Some others have been suggested. Surely you have to conclude that this is an essential function. How it was that they were declared non-essential is beyond me. But let me mention these 4 that go to honoring our veterans and the commitments that we have made to them, and go to providing for our national security and protecting Americans' health. I spoke earlier this week on the Honoring Our Promise to American Veterans Act, a bill providing funding for disability payments, the GI Bill, education training, and VA home loans under the same conditions that were in place last year. The House passed this, but the Senate Majority Leader has blocked it here. The House also passed the Pay Our Guard and Reserve Act. This bill provides funding for the pay and allowances of military personnel in the reserve component and National Guard component who are scheduled to report for duty as early as this weekend. Denying support for that, for them who wear the uniform and stand ready and have engaged when called on and have been trained to do so. Denying that is a great disservice to the men and women who've dedicated so much and put themselves at great risk to wear the uniform of the United States. Secondly, funding the Department of Homeland Security. There are a number of ways our Homeland Security is impacted under the shutdown. One of the impacts on FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is the need to be funded so that they are prepared to respond to natural disasters. We're only a breaking news headlines away from another natural disaster or some other need for FEMA to engage. And yet their employees are furloughed and not in place to be ready to respond. We've got a tropical storm in the Gulf right now. It may turn into something dangerous. Our emergency response efforts to provide for homeland support is inadequately funded. Can we not at least do that? How about funding for our intelligence community? The House will send us Preserving Our Intelligence Capabilities Act, which will provide immediate funding for personnel compensation and contracts for those individuals that have been determined by the Director of National Intelligence as necessary to support critical intelligence activities and counterterrorism efforts. Under the current shutdown, 70% of our civilian employees in our intelligence community have been sent home on furlough. Director of National Intelligence Clapper said that this lapse in funding our intelligence agency is a dreamland for our foreign intelligence adversaries. Can we not at least if we have a delay in resolving our issues here, and we have that delay, as I said, because the Senate Majority Leader has not allowed us to sit down and work, I would ask unanimous consent for an additional 3 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Madam President, I thank you. Can we not at least fund those agencies that are looking to protect us from terrorist acts, that are in place to keep the American people safe? How can we reject that? Finally, let me mention a fourth, and there are others, but let me mention a fourth. Fund the food and drug safety programs. Safety programs. Those who are in need of the approvals for new drugs and new devices that are experiencing significant delays because the federal employees at FDA that review these functions can't report to work. Now, Madam President, frankly, I'm perplexed why the Majority Leader continues to oppose even consideration and debate for individual funding bills when they just agreed a couple days ago to funding our troops. But and I applaud that and support that. But if we did that because of the essential nature of their function, shouldn't we also include these other items? Shouldn't we agree that we need to fulfill our commitments to guard, reserve, our intelligence community at this critical time? The House has already sent over 9 proposals to the Senate for consideration. 9. 9 times the Senate has had the opportunity to pass legislation to reopen our government and fund essential programs. But the Senate Majority Leader chose not to, and the President refuses to even engage. Government shutdown is a pox on all of our houses. We need to do what the people of this great country elected us to do, and that is to work to find a solution to the government shutdown. We cannot do that if the Democrat chair at the negotiating table is empty. What we're looking at here is a Clint Eastwood moment. We're looking at an empty chair. Mr. President, where are you? With that, I yield the floor.